What's up, all Berserker Bowl fans? This is your host with the most, Griever, as always, bringing you guys the latest chapter review for Kengan Omega, chapter 184, entitled Spear versus Spear. Now, right out of the gate, I like this chapter. I like the chapter, and I see a couple of the complaints, but there's a few things that I want to talk about in this chapter. Now, for those of you who don't know, of course, we are betting on Cao Pang beating Rahito in the second round match. However, we also put in a stipulation that if Rahito does win, regardless of the outcome in the right bracket, we will be betting on Rahito to take the Berserker Bowl the whole way. So, with that stipulation in mind, we're still betting on Cao Pang. Now, let's just jump right in to this chapter, Spear versus Spear. So, right out of the gate, it's the one little nitpick I have. Most people's nitpick about this chapter, which I don't think is a problem, is people think the pacing is too fast. That's from what I read. I read a couple people thinking that the fight's going too quickly or the pacing's going too fast. I don't think so. Because just because the fight's well underway and we're seeing slug for slug, panel for panel, and seeing a bunch of moves does not mean that we're rushing the fight. It does not mean that the fight is going to be over next chapter. If it is, alright, I was wrong, but I don't think it will be. I think we get at least 2 more chapters in this fight at least before we have a conclusion. So, or maybe even 3. So, I would definitely say hold on to your horses, you know, don't get your panties in a bunch until we until we see what happens, because even in universe in the chapter they said, to no one's great surprise, they rushed each other and this is going to be a slugfest between Rahito and Cao Pang. That makes total sense to me. It should make total sense to just about everybody, because once again, these guys are not exactly tactical fighters. They are sluggers. They are brawlers. It's what they do. Sure, Hammer, Burma, and Razor's Edge, but they're still big, mean, meaty dudes. They're not, you know what I mean? They're not exactly Taekwondo versus Kung Fu up in here, right? So, that being the case, I don't mind the pacing of the chapter at all, though there's not really too much to say about the fight itself thus far, each of them landing, some heavy blows on each other, and of course, we have the Thor's, which we'll bring up right now, the whole Thor's hammer versus Captain America's shield idea, the whole doom, and the vibration and all that stuff, Razor's Edge versus Cao Pang's skull. Now, the title is appropriately named Spear versus Spear, except I don't think it's appropriate, because at the very beginning of the chapter stated the age-old adage. It came from, once again, the example in Marvel, but also it's been a folktale for a long time, sort of another version of when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object sort of idea, right? It was done in Dungeon Siege 2, for example. That's the whole storyline. A sword that could shatter anything and a shield that could not be broken, be shattered. So, one of those ideas, right? So, they bring that up at the beginning of the chapter and then say, yeah, but no, they're both spears. It's like, well, first off, that's kind of a cop-out to bring that up and then be like, yeah, this is what the matchup is like. It's the shield versus the spear, except it's not, they're both spears. It's like, all right, then don't bring it up. But I'll actually make an argument that they had it right the first time, that it is spear versus shield. Because even though you can make the argument that you can certainly see how Razor's Edge is not a shield. It is certainly a spear. It's certainly an attacking move. I would argue that the Hammer of Burma is basically a shield bash. It's not exactly a spear. It's a shield bash move. It's a tackle. It's a shoulder check. That's what it is. It's blunt force trauma. It's not spear tipped in precision. It's blunt force, like a shield that if you went boom, so I find that kind of odd to me. I found that one a little odd because it realistically, Cao Pang's skeleton, his Wolverine skeleton, that's half the reason he got as far as he did in the Annihilation tournament back in Ashura. So I would argue that the Wolverine skeleton is more of a defensive ability and more of a shield to Cao Pang than an attacking spear. So I think it's kind of funny that they got it right at the beginning, acknowledge that, and then they throw that out the window for a less suited analogy? I don't know, it's just me. I understand the Hammer of Burma is an attack, but it's no different than, as I said, a shield bash, if we're using shield versus spear, right? For example, Rahito's fingers are in no way a shield. I would argue that that skeleton, that crone dome of his, or whatever you want to call it, that you know, his skeleton and his skull is certainly defensive in nature. That was his entire battle against Karo. So yeah, just saying. So Fisherman Santa Claus lost to a defensive move, not exactly the other way around. So I don't know. I find that kind of odd that they brought it up and then did that. But yeah, and as we saw the clash between them. We saw Rahito's fingers look like they got a little fucked up. But also we see that now Cao Peng, who was heavily damaged before the fight because of his fight with Cosmo, is now already bleeding, it seems, here at the end as well. And also, big shout out, last part of the review, big shout out to Mokichi Robinson, who I think that the fan base does a little dirty. I don't think he's been done dirty necessarily in the story, but for some reason a lot of people didn't think Mokichi Robinson was top shit. Or that he wasn't, he was sort of fodder. I would argue against that. Looking at his skill set, and if you seriously go back to Ashura and read his backstory and read how he can fight and all this stuff, he had just a very unfortunate matchup. You know? Like, some characters had a much easier matchup. Anybody, for example, going up against the Fang, or Oma, or Waka, or, you know, or of course, Beard God himself, Kuroki Gensai, just because he destroys them doesn't mean that they're a bad fighter necessarily, right? So in this case, Ryan was, of course, just a very bad matchup. Against a lot of the other contenders, Mokichi Robinson probably would have made it, certainly would have made it to the second round against many of the fighters in the Annihilation Tournament. And we saw that he was still recovering from that absolute devastating beating that should have killed him here in Omega. And I like the respect put on his name here in this chapter, because it's even stated that, yeah, while he was still recovering and not exactly in top form, Rahito was, of course, training with Kuroki Gensai and stuff like that, Rahito managed to defeat him. Granted, Mokichi was still recovering, and Mokichi is humbled about this, but I always liked Mokichi as a character, and I liked his style. He's certainly a master martial artist. I don't think that can be taken away from him. He just hasn't had a whole lot of time to shine, but the fact of the matter is, in a Kengan match, he defeated Cao Peng. Now, Mokichi is very humble about this and says, listen, both of these were not only while I was trying to recover, like one was 2 years ago when I wasn't fully recovered, and the next one was a year ago, but they were only single matches. So just keep that in mind. It wasn't best out of this, best out of that. You know, nobody was trying to kill each other. So keep that in mind, that they were both hard-won matches, or a hard loss and a hard win for Mokichi. It's brought up by the announcers that the match against Cao Peng, which I wish we had seen it, that would have been kind of cool to put some respect on Mokichi's name. But the fact that we're hearing about it now, that of course Seki was beating Cao Peng up until right before the tournament as well, to learn that Mokichi also beat Cao Peng, you know, 12 months ago. So very interesting. I like that, because I like the respect put on Mokichi, because I think a lot of the characters from the Annihilation Tournament, who once again lost in the first round, lost to an otherwise overwhelming top of A S tier opponent from a power scaling perspective, that doesn't make them a weak fighter necessarily. So, and I think Mokichi in that regard gets done a little dirty, not by the story, but by the fan base. You know? Because other than most other characters, everyone else seems to acknowledge, like, well, he was up against Agito, so that doesn't count. Or he was up against Gensai, so of course he was going to lose. Nobody brings up, everyone says Mokichi is trash, but he was up against Ryan. Is Ryan all of a sudden like a C-tier fighter or something? Like, that's... Losing to Ryan is not a thing, you know what I mean? Like, he didn't get one shot by him either, so... I don't know. And as we know, in his battle against Rahito, which we were trying to, you know, amp up Rahito, he was still recovering. And we know that. So, either way, I like the chapter. Overall, I don't think there's something wrong with the pacing. I like the respect put on Mokichi Robinson. Haven't seen him in a while, and I always thought he was kind of a cool character. Sort of different, you know, than a lot of the other characters. And, yeah, I'm here for it. The only thing that I had the problem with is that I would regard, you know, Cao Peng's skull as a shield with a shield bash ability rather than a spear you know, that's my only thing. But other than that, 184 was pretty good. As I said, we have bet on Sao Pang to take this match, even injured as he is going into it. But once again, if Rahito does take the W, then we're betting on Rahito for the final match to be the champion of the Berserker Bowl, regardless what happens in bracket. The right bracket. So that being said, hope you guys enjoyed the review. Like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you guys back here next time for more Kengan Omega, the Berserker Bowl. Looking forward to it. Know you guys are too. Have a good one.